All right, strap yourselves in, folks, because today we are diving headfirst into the world of remote viewing.
Yeah, get ready for a wild ride.
We're talking about digging into declassified CIA files, unearthing training manuals from the Stanford Research Institute, and even unpacking accounts from some of the most famous remote viewers, like, the legendary Ingo Swann.
It's true. We've got a treasure trove of material to sift through. And honestly, some of this stuff is straight out of science fiction, or at least what we used to think was science fiction.
Right, so let's break it down for everyone listening. What exactly is remote viewing? I mean, should I be picturing folks sitting in a darkened room, staring into a crystal ball, trying to predict the lottery numbers?
Well, I suppose a crystal ball could be involved if you're really going for that whole mystic vibe. Haha.
Okay, I get it. Maybe not the most accurate image.
The way I like to think about it is remote viewing is like, imagine being able to describe a place, a person, an event even, that's happening thousands of miles away with incredible accuracy. Like you're actually there experiencing it firsthand.
Okay, that's pretty wild. But how does that even work?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Our sources, particularly that CIA manual, lay out this system called coordinate remote viewing, or CRV.
CRV, okay, got it.
And it's based on this idea that there's this sort of information field, they call it the matrix, where everything is interconnected.
Hold on, the matrix, like Keanu Reeves dodging bullets. Am I picking up what you're laying down?
Exactly. It's like a giant cosmic database with like every bit of information imaginable just waiting to be accessed.
Okay, whoa. So everything is connected in this matrix.
That's the theory. And it actually connects to some pretty old ideas, too. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, he called it the cosmic unconsciousness, this wellspring of shared human experience, right?
Right, I've heard of that. But
Yeah.
how do you tap into it? Do you need, special powers?
Well, some might say we all have those special powers lying dormant within us, but that's a whole other deep dive.
Noted. Another time, maybe. But for now, back to CRV and the matrix.
Right, so the CRV, it's a structured approach to tapping into that signal, like tuning into a specific radio frequency to get the information you're looking for.
So no crystal ball, but maybe like a psychic antenna.
You got it. And there's this term they use, aperture. It's like, how wide is your focus? A narrow aperture is like a glimpse. A wide aperture, though, that's drinking from a fire hose of data.
No wonder they need all that training we were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about focusing your mind. There are protocols, safeguards, a whole system designed to make sure the information is as accurate as possible.
Okay, so what about, the elephant in the room? Does it actually work?
I knew you were going to ask me that. That's the million-dollar question, right? And unfortunately, there isn't a simple answer.
Of course not. It's never that easy.
Mainstream science, they're pretty skeptical. As they should be. They want hard-proof, replicable experiments, the whole 9 yards, which is fair, but it makes it tricky to study something like remote viewing, which is so subjective.
Right. It's not like measuring the speed of light or something.
Exactly. It's tricky. But then there's the other side of it. If remote viewing does work, what are the ethical implications?
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other can of worms.
Privacy, potential for misuse. Things get complicated pretty quickly.
Okay, so we've got this intriguing possibility, potentially huge implications, but not a lot of hard proof. Where do we even start with trying to understand all of this?
Well, I think a good place to start is with the experiences of actual remote viewers. People you mentioned Ingo Swann.
Ingo Swann, right? The name is practically synonymous with remote viewing. What can you tell us about his involvement in all of this?
So Ingo was working with, physicists and researchers at the Stanford Research Institute, back in the 70s, doing these controlled experiments, seeing if the stuff held up under, laboratory conditions.
Wow. So they were taking it seriously even back then. Were they recruiting people for these experiments? How do you even sign up for something like that?
I'm not sure they had a sign-up sheet or anything.
Right, because it's not your average Tuesday night activity.
Exactly. But, it's fascinating to think about what drew people to this kind of research, the potential they saw in it.
Totally. So you've got these scientists, you've got Ingo Swann. This is all starting to sound very serious. What exactly were they trying to do with remote viewing? Give this inside scoop.
Well, one of the most famous examples, and this is where things get really interesting, is Ingo Swann's remote viewing of Jupiter.
The planet. Hold on. I'm no astronomer, but I'm pretty sure you can't just see Jupiter up close without like a really powerful telescope. What did he see?
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1970s, right? We didn't have the same kind of clear images of Jupiter that we do now from space probes and all that.
Right, no Google Images back then.
Exactly. So Ingo, using only his mind, right, he describes a ring system around Jupiter.
Wait, a ring system like Saturn.
Exactly.
Right.
And at the time, nobody knew about it, or at least it wasn't confirmed. Then, years later, Voyager probe goes out there, and what do they find?
Jupiter has rings.
Yep. A faint ring system, just like Ingo described.
No way. Okay, that's pretty wild.
Right. It's one of those stories that makes you wonder, what if there's something more to all of this than we realize?
Okay, that Jupiter story. It's blowing my mind a little bit, but it also reminds me of something we found in the CIA files. They talk about this thing called aesthetic impact.
Oh, yeah, aesthetic impact. That's an important one.
They were saying that it's about how the target makes the viewer feel, not just what they see. Can you imagine the awe, maybe even fear of seeing a planet like Jupiter just with your mind?
I know. It really highlights how subjective this whole thing is, right? It's not always just cold, hard data. Sometimes it's about intuition, emotion, those subtle cues that can be really important.
It's like, are we talking about ESP or science? Maybe it's both.
Maybe it's both. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, really. And, it's important to remember, we're talking about real people here. Ingo Swann, he wasn't just some, lab rat. He was an artist, a writer. We also have Pat Price, who was a former police commissioner. Lynn Buchanan had a background in military intelligence. What a crew.
Exactly. And they all came to remote viewing from these completely different backgrounds, which I think is important. It suggests that this isn't some, superpower reserved for a select few.
Right, maybe it's something that's more universally accessible.
Exactly. Maybe it's a potential that exists within all of us, just waiting to be unlocked.
Okay, now that is a thought-provoking idea. What if everyone has this latent ability, this untapped potential for remote viewing? That's
a whole lot of responsibility.
Yeah, but also potentially a whole lot of amazing things.
Right. And it raises the question, what else are we capable of if we can tap into that potential?
That's a question for the ages, really. But for now, we've got a lot more to unpack here. What about those everyday people who claim to have had remote viewing experiences? We've got these fascinating accounts from regular folks, right?
We do. And those stories are important, too, because they often show us how remote viewing could be used in, practical ways.
Like how? Give me some examples.
Well, we've got accounts of people using remote viewing to find lost objects, gain insights into personal relationships. There's even a case involving a murder investigation.
A murder investigation. Okay, now this is getting good. Did they use remote viewing to catch the killer? Tell me everything.
Well, according to this one account, a remote viewer, they claimed to have witnessed the murder as it happened. They provided details about the perpetrator, even said that he was bald but had removed a wig at the crime scene.
No way. Was he really?
He was. And the information was actually relayed to the police, and guess what? They apprehended a suspect who was, in fact, bald and had been wearing a wig.
You've got to be kidding me. Did they get a confession? What happened?
Well, the details of the case are a little murky, but the police were definitely able to utilize that information in their investigation.
That is incredible. Okay, so we're not saying that remote viewing is going to replace traditional detective work, but it's definitely food for thought. And speaking of food for thought, how can we forget Ingo Swann's claims about extraterrestrial activity on the moon?
Ah, yes, the moon. It seems like whenever you delve into the world of remote viewing, you inevitably end up talking about UFOs and extraterrestrials.
It's like they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
But in Ingo Swann's case, we're not just talking about random UFO sightings, right? This was a whole secret government program, or so he claimed.
Right. According to his book, Penetration, he was tasked with remote viewing the moon to investigate. Well, let's just say unusual activity.
Okay, so we're talking potential alien bases, hidden structures, that kind of thing.
That's the gist of it, yeah. And while Swann's claims are certainly controversial, they're echoed by other remote viewers who claim to have encountered UFOs and otherworldly beings during their sessions.
Okay, so this is where my skepticism goes head to head with my sense of wonder. Because on the one hand, aliens on the moon. Really?
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if remote viewing can do all the things we've been talking about, who knows?
Right. It's like, at what point does the impossible become simply the unknown?
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, right? We're talking about pushing the boundaries of what we believe is possible, venturing into the realm of the unknown, and who knows what incredible discoveries await us there.
That's what I'm saying. It's an adventure for the mind, and we're just getting started.
So last time we were talking about remote viewers potentially being able to influence events with just their minds. That's a lot to wrap your head around, right?
It really is, yeah. I mean, are we talking like telekinesis here? Moving objects with their thoughts?
That's what I'm wondering. Can they do that? Because that's what it makes me think of.
Well, to be honest, I haven't come across any accounts of remote viewers, levitating objects or anything like that. But the idea that our thoughts, our intentions, could actually have a measurable effect on the world around us, now that's a fascinating possibility.
Okay, so maybe no telekinetic superpowers, at least not yet. But are there actually any, documented cases of people influencing events with their thoughts? Have there been experiments or anything?
There have been experiments, yeah. It's a controversial area of research, for sure, but some researchers believe that our minds might be capable of, subtly influencing physical systems.
Subtly. Okay, so how subtly? What are we talking about here?
Think of it like this. Imagine a system based on randomness, right? Like the flip of a coin. Some researchers believe our minds might be able to ever so slightly tip the scales, influence the outcome, even if it's just at the level of probability.
Okay, so you're saying, our thoughts could potentially make a coin land on heads more often if we really, really concentrate.
Potentially, yeah. There have been experiments with things called random number generators, where basically participants try to use their thoughts to influence the sequence of numbers generated.
And what were the results? Did it work? Could they actually do it?
Yeah, well, some of these studies did show statistically significant results. It's not like conclusive proof, but it suggests that maybe, just maybe, our minds can have a small but measurable effect on random events.
That's pretty wild. It makes you think about those moments when you're thinking of someone and then they call you out of the blue and you think, whoa, what are the chances?
Exactly. Those little synchronicities, right. What if it's not just coincidence? What if there's something more at play?
Okay, now my brain is really starting to hurt, but in a good way. This is the kind of stuff I live for. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second and talk about some of the more practical applications of remote viewing. We've touched on espionage and criminal investigations, but are there other ways this could be used in, the real world to actually help people?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the most promising areas is search and rescue. Think about it. Being able to locate missing persons, disaster survivors, using remote viewing, that could have a huge impact.
It would be incredible, like having a team of psychic detectives on call for emergencies.
Yeah.
But are there actually, any organizations using remote viewing for that?
There are a few groups out there who are specifically focused on applying remote viewing to real-world problems like that, like missing person cases. And get this, even archaeological digs.
Archaeology? Really? Hold on. You're saying remote viewers are out there, finding lost cities and ancient artifacts with their minds?
You'd be surprised. It sounds crazy, right? But there have been some really interesting cases, like where remote viewers have helped pinpoint potential archaeological sites, and then later on, traditional archaeologists actually go out there and find stuff just like they said they would.
Okay, that is pretty mind-blowing. But it also makes you wonder, if remote viewing is this potentially useful for all these things? Why isn't it more widely accepted? Why is there still so much skepticism, even from scientists?
I think part of it is that we still don't fully understand how remote viewing works. It's hard to study something scientifically when you don't know the mechanism behind it.
It's like trying to bake a cake without knowing what ingredients to use.
Right. Or how ovens work, for that matter. But even without a complete scientific explanation, those anecdotal accounts, the intriguing experimental results, they're hard to just brush aside.
So we're left with this kind of paradox, right? We have this potential tool that could, revolutionize how we do things, but it doesn't quite fit into our current understanding of how the world works.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay open-minded, to keep asking questions, to keep exploring.
Speaking of exploring, let's go back to some of the weirder aspects of remote viewing for a minute. I want to talk more about time. Do remote viewers claim to actually travel through time? Can they change the past or see the future? What's the deal with that?
Time travel, that's the big one, right?
Yeah.
The ultimate mystery. And while I haven't seen any evidence that remote viewers can physically travel through time, like hopping in a DeLorean, their experiences with time definitely challenge our usual way of thinking about it.
Okay, you can't just drop a line like that and not give me details. What kind of experiences are we talking about?
Well, there are accounts of remote viewers who say they've witnessed historical events, but as if they were actually there. They experience the sights, sounds, even the emotions of the past firsthand.
So like time travel, but for the mind.
Yeah, exactly. Mental time travel. And it's not just limited to the past either. Some remote viewers even talk about getting glimpses of potential futures, different timelines, parallel universes. It gets pretty wild.
Parallel universes. Okay, now we really are going down the rabbit hole.
I know, right? But that's the thing with remote viewing. It's like the deeper you go, the more you realize how much we don't know about the nature of reality.
It really makes you think, what else is out there? What other possibilities are we blind to?
And that sense of wonder, of possibility, that's what I find so exciting about exploring this stuff.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's like we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what our minds are truly capable of.
Exactly. And that's a journey I think is worth taking, even if it gets a little weird sometimes.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from psychic spies to UFOs on the moon. But I think there's one big question we haven't really tackled yet.
And what's that?
What does all of this whole world of remote viewing, tell us about, well,
Yeah.
reality itself?
Ah.
You know, our place in the universe, the nature of consciousness, all that big picture stuff.
Oh, yeah, the big questions, the ones that keep philosophers up at night.
Exactly. Because if we're even entertaining the possibility of remote viewing, we're talking about a very different kind of universe than the one we usually think about.
Right, a universe where maybe, just maybe, we're far more interconnected than we realize, where consciousness isn't bound by the usual limitations of space and time.
That's right. Because one of the themes that keeps popping up in these sources is this idea of a matrix, this universal information field that remote viewers are supposedly tapping into.
Yeah, that's a pretty mind-blowing concept when you really stop and think about it. Like, what is that? And if it exists, what are the implications?
Exactly. It's like, are we talking about some kind of cosmic internet where everything past, present, future, it's all accessible somehow?
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? And it makes you wonder, what else is out there just beyond our current perception?
That's a question I don't think anyone has the answer to.
Yeah.
Yet. But hey, maybe remote viewing is a step in that direction. Maybe it's giving us a glimpse into something much bigger, much stranger than we ever imagined.
I think that's a distinct possibility. And, this idea of higher dimensions, that comes up a lot, too.
Higher dimensions? Are we talking about like string theory and all that? I'm not sure I'm following.
Yeah, that's where things get really complex really fast. But essentially, some physicists believe that there might be many more dimensions to reality than the 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension that we experience.
Okay, so like our universe is just one slice of a much larger, multi-dimensional something.
Exactly. And some researchers believe that remote viewing might be a way of tapping into these higher dimensions, of accessing information that's not bound by our usual understanding of space and time.
Which would explain a lot, actually. Like, all those accounts of remote viewers witnessing historical events or getting glimpses of potential futures, maybe even catching glimpses of parallel universes.
Right. Suddenly it doesn't seem quite as far-fetched, does it?
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of, I don't know, a little intimidating, right? If our minds are really capable of all that,
Yes.
of transcending the boundaries of space and time.
It's a big responsibility, that's for sure. And I think that's something that a lot of people in the remote viewing community take very seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Because if we're talking about accessing this universal information field, we're talking about a whole new level of potential, both for good and for...
Misuse for unintended consequences.
Exactly. So I think the message here is curiosity, yes, absolutely. Exploration, definitely. But also caution, respect for the unknown.
I think that's a good philosophy for life in general, don't you?
Uh-huh. You might be right about that. Well, folks, we've journeyed from the halls of the CIA to the outer reaches of the cosmos. And I don't know about you, but my brain is officially fried.
Mine too. It's been a wild ride.
It has. But I think this is a good place to wrap up this particular deep dive into the world of remote viewing, at least for now.
For now, yeah. But who knows what the future holds?
That's right. And for our listeners who are now just as hooked on this topic as we are, where should they go to explore these ideas further? What would you recommend?
Well, the beauty of it is a lot of the information is out there, readily available. Declassified CIA manuals, the Stanford Research Institute documents, they're all online. And of course, there are amazing books by the pioneers of remote viewing, Ingo Swann, Lynn Buchanan, and so many others.
And, who knows? Maybe you'll even discover a hidden talent for remote viewing yourself. We've all got those untapped potentials lurking within us, right?
That's right. And maybe one of our listeners will be the one to make the next groundbreaking discovery in this field. The possibilities are endless, really.
They just might. And hey, if they do, tell them to look us up. We'd love to hear all about it. But until then, keep those minds open, keep exploring those possibilities, and remember, sometimes the most incredible journeys begin with a single thought.